Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along today. Well, you're not actually coming along, but thank you for listening in. My name is Diana Cotter. I am a resident of Coburg. I'm a garden designer. I'm a consultant. Today we're going to be talking about nature strips. This picture in the background is actually my nature strip. And we're hoping to encourage some of you to think about getting rid of your grass and beautifying your street and your neighbourhood.
Hi everyone, thank you. My name is Alex English. I'm Moreland Council's Open Space Planner, and we'll get started on the presentation. Before we start, just like to do an acknowledgement of country, to acknowledge that we're here meeting on the land of the Wurundjeri in the Coburg Library. And thank you to all the Coburg Library staff as well. I'd like to pay my respect to Wurundjeri elders, past, present, and future, and emerging in that way, and also acknowledge that this land has never been ceded. Okay, I'll just share the screen with our presentation. Okay, so nature's trip.
Nature's trip. Let's hope so. So these are just three pictures of my garden. I'm very lucky, my nature strip. I'm very lucky that I've got 5 meters to play with. I've planted predominantly indigenous and native plants with a few ornamentals which will flower in the summer. One of my main aims was to act as an urban corridor, which I'll ask Alex to explain a little bit more about.
So some of the first steps, we've got a really helpful guide called the Nature Strip Guide, and we've got a website here where you can find some more details about that information about how to get started with your nature. We'll also put this guide together with the sustainable gardening booklet, the links in the chat on the conversation there that you can find those booklets. They really give you good background about things you need to think of, good planning. We'll go through a bit of that today, but that's where you can go back to those materials to find more information. So one of the first things to think about
is to decide what you want to plant. There's lots of different ways to go. You might think about indigenous, which is plants that come from this area. You might want to have a mix of natives and indigenous. Native plants come from anywhere in Australia. You might want all ornamentals. You might want a mixture of all three, or you might think about planting edibles.
One of the first things to look at is when you're on your nature strip, looking out for services. And you can do that visually, seeing where there might be a Telstra kit in the ground, power pole, there might be your gas meters, water meters, knowing where they go. But the most important thing is that you check out Dial Before You Dig online. And there, if you put in your address, register, and they'll actually send you all of the services mapped in your nature strip in your street, where you identify that on a map. You can pick up most of those yourself, but it is really important to look at those. The other thing to look at, is there an existing street tree, and making sure that you're actually not digging in and around the base of that tree too much or damaging it. Now, the challenging, really big hard one is actually removing the grass and removing it effectively, because you don't want to have to deal with all of that keep growing through and having to pull it out of all of your plants. So Diana's got some really good tips here for how to get started.
So this is a system that I use all the time, and it works pretty well. So killing the grass without chemicals. If your soil is dry, for example, nowadays, you want to try to get the soil wet as much as possible, or wait until it rains. So you might think about starting to prepare your soil in the autumn and then planting in the winter or the spring. If you do need to water it now, then make sure that you water it really, really slowly, because the soil is probably going to be hydrophobic, which means that it's going to run straight off. So what you're going to do once your soil is moist is to cover the area with cardboard. You can get great big boxes from cycle shops or fruit and veg shops, or even you might find people who put them out for hard rubbish. Overlap the cardboard by about 10 centimetres to make sure that the grass can't poke through, or you can use newspaper. If you do that, you want it at least 8 to 10 sheets thick, and overlap it by about 20 centimetres, otherwise that grass will just poke through. Once you've done that, spread your compost or manure about 50 centimetres thick, or that's about 2 inches in the old language. Then you want to put a mulch on top of that. I like to use pea straw because it's got a lot more nutrients in it, or you can use bark. And this layer needs to be about 75 millimeters thick. That's about 3 inches. Then you want to leave it for about 3 to 4 months for that grass to die and make sure that all the roots have gone as well.
So this is what you do before you put your plants in. So there's illustrations of the steps Diana just went through. You can see the newspaper laid out. You can see the pea straw. You can see the overlapping of the newspaper. And then on the left, you can see some wood mulch. But the really valuable one is up in the top corner, is with some of the leaf litter and sticks, twigs that have dropped down, and they provide really important habitat for little skinks, other insects, that pollinators, and for the birds as well that use it for nest material. Some of the practicalities with the presentation we've got here have come from the actual nature strip guidelines. And one of the most important things to think about is just making sure those plants don't grow over about 50 centimetres when you're close to a driveway or next to the road. Also think about how you're going to get in and out of your car, but also other people who park there, how they'll get in and out of the car. So make sure you keep an area around where the doors are open, and understand that maybe somebody might stand on some of the plants. So maybe in those spots, leave them as mulch or look as little steps. The other thing to think about is avoiding any trip hazards. So next to your footpath, ensure that the grade is the same between where the plants are, the mulch, and the footpath. And really the important thing there is thinking about how big those plants will grow. And so check the labels or have a look around the area to see how big those plants are growing and how far they're spreading. The really important thing is actually making sure all that grass is dead before you get started with planting, because that grass will just continue to give you a lot of trouble. Now, it's really important that if you do see a few little bits of grass that are still growing, even if you pull it out by hand, you might find there's small nodes that still live. And that's why we do recommend carefully spraying with a bit of herbicide on that remaining grass, and that will take 2 to 3 weeks. Plant choice.
So this is the fun part. Deciding what to plant, obviously. Probably the best thing to do is to wander your local streets and see what works and what appeals. What works meaning doesn't take too much maintenance. Speak with your neighbours, tell them about your plans. They might have good ideas as well. And conversely, they're a really, really good way to get to know your neighbours. I know that when I'm working on my nature strip, I talk to dog walkers, people that I didn't even know lived in my street. So really, really good way of bonding with other people.
And you'll also learn a lot.
Absolutely.
Your neighbours are a wealth of knowledge.
Indeed.
And they'll share propagation tips, they'll tell you about some other plants they're growing, and they'll even share plants with you. And I think this is one of the probably the biggest benefits. We often talk about biodiversity and stormwater benefits, but actually it's the social benefits I find really are the big benefits.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Sometimes there's opportunities where you could put edible plants, and one of the things that's important to think about is have a look at the guidelines we've got there for what is a suitable location for edible plants, or you can contact council as well. I'll let you go through.
Just a few pros and cons. Thank you, Alex. Dogs will want to wee and worse on your nature strip, so you might want to put a little sign up saying please don't. Just a polite sign. Some plants are more suitable than others. Beautiful juicy peaches there, but just think about when they're going to drop. If you don't harvest them, they're going to splatter on the pavement and might attract wasps. If you park underneath those trees, you may end up with fruit on your roof of your car. So perhaps that's not the best option. The olive tree, bottom right, if you don't pick the fruit, they can become an environmental weed. I'll ask Alex to explain that in a minute. So yes, it's a great way if you haven't got much space in your garden to extend your planting and edible area. Herbs aren't a bad idea, and then you can invite your neighbours to pick what they want as well.
Environmental weeds. Weeds are just a plant that is unwanted, and it's really a challenging one because weeds actually play an important role in many ways too. But here we're just going to give some basics that we need to be mindful when we're planting certain plants that they don't end up falling into the drain in the creek and spreading through our creeks or our parks. And I think there's a list in our nature strip guidelines of some of the plants, and in that website of plants that we know are environmental weeds. And Diana mentioned the olive. Now we're finding a lot of people aren't harvesting their olives anymore. They're starting to see them in our parks and waterways a lot more. So be mindful that the plants you put on your nature strip can travel and they can cause problems elsewhere.
And there's also a slight problem with cuttings. Often people give cuttings away of plants that are very rampant. That's why they've got so much to give away. So just be careful that you're not just transplanting unsuitable plants from other people.
Okay. The big benefit of planting nature strip is really habitat gardening. And we've got a nature plan that Council endorsed in 2020, and that is really elevating the importance and role that we can all play in improving biodiversity in Moreland. One of the elements of that plan and in our urban forest strategy was to identify habitat corridors and connectivity. And this is where we've found that our nature strips actually make up about 30% of our open space in Moreland. So for public land, nature strips are about 1/3. Now that's an amazing opportunity for residents to make a contribution to improving biodiversity. This can also have stormwater, but it also supports all of our pollinators and insects. And those connections can be made along your nature strips that connect up our parks and our waterways. And I think you could go about your workshop you've got planned.
Yeah, so we're doing a workshop on habitat gardening at the library on February the 16th. It would be fantastic if we could come along there and we can elaborate on a lot of these factors. I just wanted to say that I find it so alarming that more and more buildings are going up. I know that people need somewhere to live, so no problem with that at all. It's just that there's less and less area for all these creatures to live. So if we can help them, so much better.
We have one example of that, the Green Wall at the Coburg Library, where you do have built environment where you can actually go vertically. So there's an alternative there. And you've got some really good examples, haven't you?
Yeah, so these are just habitat and indigenous plants that have been used on nature strips. Some people might find them really untidy. Other people might look past that. People, I'm actually doing this for all those creatures that haven't got much area to live in. As I say, I'm very lucky. I've got 5 meters wide. There is that top right-hand picture. The more usual nature strip is only 1 meter wide, but there's still lots you can do. And there's a nice example of a gap in the middle so that you can walk through from your car onto the path. Second picture is my neighbour's garden, which nature strip, which is all indigenous. So take what you want, what you like. It's obviously worth choosing what you like, and then you're much more likely to maintain it.
Wealth of information about how to prepare your nature strip, but also they recommend about a dozen plants that they know are tried and trusted for the Moreland nature strips. And they also propagate their own plants, which are available during the year for sale. But the Brunswick Community of Nature have done an amazing job, mainly along Union Street in Brunswick, but also with the Friends of Ed in Edward Street and some of the other neighbouring areas across Moreland.
So these might appeal to other people. These are a mixture of natives and indigenous and ornamentals, which have the bright colours. Just be a little bit aware that beautiful picture on the bottom left-hand corner looks wonderful, but they're all perennials. So in the winter, there's not going to be much there at all. So a mixture of evergreen and perennials is a really good idea.
Planting indigenous grasses. These are 3 good shots of kangaroo grasses, wallaby grasses, and there's a list here of some of other grasses you can grow and the sizes they get to. Some of them do get rather large, but we know that indigenous grasses can actually have a much bigger environmental and biodiversity benefit than flowering plants, and are really important for pollinators. One of the things to think about is pruning them right back to the base in around March, and then they'll resprout during the winter months.
A couple of slides of what they can look like. Obviously, the first slide on the left-hand side is all grasses, a big range of grasses. They're going to provide for butterflies who will lay their eggs on the grasses. Birds will take the dead grasses, the dead fronds. It's a habitat for little mammals to hide in there. So that's doing an awful lot of good. If you don't like that, then the top picture shows a combination of ornamentals and grasses, and the bottom picture has got a few evergreen grasses popped in there as well.
The photo really highlights that planting en masse can work really well with grasses, doesn't it?
Yes,
Great.
indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. Yeah.
Okay. A couple more examples of lomandras, dianellas, and enigaxanthus, which is the kangaroo paw. These are also really good plants that will do well, and there's a lot of cultivars out there in the nurseries and the market that will suit the sizes that you need there. There's a couple more examples of good species and some of their sizes. You'll find more information in the Sustainable Gardening booklet. Some really nice
shrubs. So this is the first one's my nature strip. I've got various plants in there. I've got different colours. I've got upright plants, just to make it look a bit more interesting when things aren't in flower. And the picture to the right is the same shrubs, but they've been pruned into interesting shapes. So that look might appeal a little bit more.
Great, beautiful cloud-like forms in the garden. Wonderful.
Summer flowers, I add these because I like them, and also bees and birds and various other insects like them as well. And here are just a few more.
Yeah, some great examples, I think, and most of these are really drought hardy and really well.
And they flower for a long time, which is really important. So we want to get as much bang for our buck as we can.
Some people like to put together a bit of a planting plan, and that helps them with arrangement, understanding sight lines, where they're going to put their bins. And the main thing there is thinking about those safety elements of where you've got driveways or a road nearby. So you can look at the guidelines. There's more information on these.
Maintenance is pretty important. I have a bit of a different philosophy on weeding, which the next slide will show, but we do need to look after these nature strips. I've actually had the water going on mine this morning for an hour and a half, just because things were looking really, really sad.
So weeding. I suppose the approach there is if you get in early and you're quite focused, the most important thing is getting them before they start to seed and drop those seeds. And if you spend your first 3 to 6 months trying to remove weeds around your newly planted plants, you will actually have a lot more success. And you might not even have to weed after 2 years' time or after a year. You will get occasional ones that birds bring in or blown in, but weeds are actually more beneficial than bare earth. And I think that's the point you're trying to make there, isn't it? That
Yes, yes. That last slide shows where the weeds have been removed, and the soil will crack, it will dry out, all the microbes, the worms will just leave that area. So if you're not planning to do your nature strip planting straight away, you might actually leave the weeds there until you're ready to start planting and preparing. Just so the first picture shows I watered my nature strip yesterday. That was just literally a count of 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, on the poor little plant. It ran straight under the bark, and you can see it dripping down the gutter. So you need to water really, really slowly. The next photo shows that I've made a little depression behind that little grass, filled up that depression, waited until it's all drained away, then I add a little bit more. So it's literally a count of 1, 2, 3. Do all the other plants come back again? And then the last photo just shows my my rainmaker. I've elevated it so that it gets a really good area to cover, but I would be keeping that on for at least an hour.
why wouldn't you get out there and start work?
Absolutely. Look at the alternative. Who wants to be doing that in the hot sun?
Into presentation. We understand that if you've got questions or comments, our contact details will be in the comments, but otherwise you can come back to Diana's next presentation and have more opportunity where it's in person to ask some questions there.
On the 16th of February. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.